It's before the top of the day, before the top of the hour. Let me try that again. A very, very good morning to you. Of course, today is Africa Day, and the history of this day, well, if we have to go back to 1963, that was the formation of the Organization of African Unity. Of course, it was only in 2002 when our former president, Thabo Mbeki, of course, at the helm of the change that took place when the African Union was formed. It originally started with, I think, around about 32 countries. There's about 53 countries now that are a part of the African Union. The chair of the African Union is the Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, and of course the commission is chaired by our very own Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and she of course is the very first female that has ever had the opportunity to chair that. So there's a very interesting history with the African Union, and South Africa being very much so a part of all of it. I mean, the African Union was formed in Durban at the conference there in 2002. And then, of course, the legislative capital, of course, is where the Pan-African Parliament is, and that's in Midrand. So that's just a couple of facts on this Africa Day. But let's look at something that's going to be happening this year, and it's a really interesting development. With, of course, Africa Day around, and we're talking about African deals, one of those is the upcoming 27th African Union Summit, which is scheduled to take place in Rwanda, and that's happening in July. Now, the difference with this year's event is that it will see African heads of state carrying an African passport in an effort to start establishing the long talked about unity on the continent. So joining us from our Pretoria studio to discuss this more is Faith Mabera. She is a researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Faith, lovely to have you. Thanks so much for being with us on the program.
Good morning, Leanne, and happy Africa Day to you.
Thank you very much, and a very happy Africa Day to you too. This has been seen as an ideal for the continent, talking about this African passport. What are its advantages or disadvantages, if any?
Obviously, so I need to just give you a bit of background into how this whole idea came about, and you're right in mentioning that the whole issue of a seamless Africa started way back, even while the AU was still the Organization for African Unity, so with the 1970s Lagos Plan. But obviously it was revived in 2006 by former chairperson of the AU, Alpha Konare, and obviously the person who's popularized this notion is Gaddafi in 1999 with his notion of the United States of Africa. So Africa obviously with a single currency, a single president, and one Pan-African passport for all Africans. And of late, as far as I know, the only other African president who's pushed for this idea, who's revived Gaddafi's notion, is Mugabe, when he mentioned the whole idea of having a super league Africa with one figurehead leader for the continent, but obviously that comes with its own permutations and issues. Yeah. So you were asking about some of the issues that we had to anticipate with such an idea. I mean, several considerations here. The first that comes to my mind is the issue of migration and refugees, obviously, because by its very definition, a Pan-African passport implies that physical borders do fall away, and this leaves the notion of what happens now to the more prosperous African states, and are they to anticipate a mass influx of migrants and refugees, and if so, will they be able to cope with such a massive influx of not only economic migrants, but with the state of the continent, also refugees? So that brings in a whole stake of issues, and as if you can recall, some presidents are not totally open to this idea. I mean, South Africa was one of those nations that was a bit apprehensive about the notion of completely opening up borders, especially in view of the fact that we still don't have ministers. African ministers haven't yet formulated, the Executive Council and also the PRC hasn't yet formulated a protocol on the free movement of persons. So without such a document in place, It's a bit complicated to just dive in. It needs a lot of planning and strategy.
Indeed it does, but we're already seeing,
Yeah.
I mean, that some of the heads of states are actually already using these, and some VIP officials already have the so-called African passport. And I mean, this, I think, is the first time where we're going to be seeing during the, in July, where these leaders are going to be using this African passport, basically to travel freely between countries, to not have to get visas, to go in, do business, work properly within the countries without having to go through all of the red tape. Having said that, I suppose, like you're saying, it does open it up to a lot of issues as well within the continent. Already we see refugees and illegal immigrants in a lot of the countries, but now with this one single passport, it could open up a lot of problems. How far are we away from actually developing a single African passport?
Technically, I would say the ideal vision obviously was around 2018, and this all builds up to the Agenda 2063, obviously of a seamless and borderless continent, you know, an Africa that's politically united under the notions of Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance. So ideally, obviously, the long-term target was 2063, and I've seen a bit of reports here and there, some saying 2018, others 2020, but as you can imagine, it boils down to that very issue that I was speaking about. If you think about the notion now of just regional, if you take, for instance, from the level of the regional integration, the various regional economic committees, so ECOWAS and the EAC and SADC all have varying degrees of regional integration. So the ideal formula for this would be, it begins maybe with harmonization of migration policies at the regional and the sub-regional level, and then moves on to the continental level. But as you can imagine, just within the regional organizations, there's a lot of mismatch and varying levels of compliance with this.
Yeah.
So obviously the dominating issue here is a lot of the member states are lagging behind in terms of just harmonizing their movement protocols and their migration policies and everything. So long-term 2063, short-term I would say 2020, depending on the regional economic committee. But I mean,
almost around the corner. It really is. Listen, before you go, and we've run out of time, Faith, I don't want to interrupt you, but I need to. You know, this was a vision that has been around for a very long time. I mean, in fact, Muammar Gaddafi speaks of this and spoke of it for a very, very long time. I mean, if we go back to the 1990s, I think it was in the 1980s, actually, the Lagos Plan of Action, and in 1991, the treaty establishing the African Economic Community, also known as the Abuja Treaty. These all spoke about these things. But what about the single African currency? Is that something we can look at very, very quickly? Do you think alongside the passport, this currency could be a reality?
Also boils down to that matter of how willing member states are in terms of ceding sovereignty. And, you know, we have to be realistic. There's varying levels of gross domestic product across countries, varying levels of economic growth and just diversification of the economy. So it's all this idea of very many states, of the more prosperous ones, are more concerned with the other states piggybacking on the economic success. So it's a matter of just how selfless, how willing are states to put aside their statist notions and actually embrace this whole idea of Pan-Africanism. So it's sort of an open question there. I mean, we just need to see how stirred up within the African leadership this notion of putting aside selfish state interests and just looking for the common idea. That's the the silver bullet in this equation.
All right, we're leaving it there. Thank you so much for talking to us here on this Africa Day, talking to us about a single passport enabling you to travel around Africa, and also that prospect of a single currency within Africa. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea? Would you love to see something like that happening? We'd love to hear from you at Morning Light, SABC. That's our Twitter handle.